Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, where I'm very excited today to be joined by the writer of my all-time favourite Doctor Who episode. And fact, no hyperbole. I love hyperbole, but this is pure unhallowed truth. And I'm pleased to be joined by Robert Shearman, the author of the 9th Doctor episode, the Dalek episode Dalek, which has now been turned into a beautiful Target novel by Robert and by the good folks at Target, which you can order from the links attached to this video. How are you today, Robert?
I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, no, for a very wet, slightly cold Thursday in a pandemic, I'm actually doing pretty well, which is good.
Yeah, no, given those provisos, things aren't so bad.
I mean, the fact that you have to always add those provisos now to anything you say about when people say how you're doing. I think I'm okay. Yes.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Now, as I've just said, and as we've just been saying off camera, your episode that you've adapted, it is literally my favourite episode of Doctor Who. And I'll tell you a quick story. One of the things that I look after here at Titan is we make a bunch of Doctor Who merchandise. So if you've ever seen the Doctor Who Titans vinyl figures,
yes,
my team makes those and designs those.
Oh.
And once we were going through our 9th Doctor wave, and it was quite some time after the 9th Doctor was on the air, and there was a Doctor on the air. It was quite far into the contemporary version of Doctor Who, and I won't say which Doctor that was, but there was a degree of fatigue among myself and my team about what was happening in the show. But we're developing the wave, and we had to get the references for the sculpts, and so we sat down and watched your episode. And as we watched your episode, we were going to look at it for 10 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. We ended up watching the whole thing in one go in the middle of the afternoon in the office. And so what went from being 3 of us went to being 10 of us. And at the end of it, we were like, that is a Doctor Who episode. That's the high bench. That's high watermark. That's what it can be like.
That makes me very happy. It does work. I mean, I didn't see it for years. I hadn't seen it for such a long time when I got the call from Target to adapt it. And I went back really apprehensively thinking, but what if it's rubbish? I mean, what if after all these years, it just looks this creaky, old-fashioned, non-HD thing? And there are areas where I just thought, yeah, that's definitely made in 2004. But I felt very proud of it, actually. And I do think it's a very good series. Just think that what Russell constructed then was, it's like the perfect season. If we were only ever going to do that one season, and at the time making it, I mean, Russell had ambitions way beyond that, but I was resigned to the idea that this might not work. And I thought, well, if it doesn't, these 13 episodes really try very hard to showcase exactly why all of us working on the show still adore it all these years on. And if we're going to go out, we're going out with a bang. And yet, it is still on. I find that incredible. I find it amazing that my episode and that series was part of the sort of the foundation for so much stuff. It's incredible. It's actually one of those genuine things where I can feel incredibly, not justifiably, because it wasn't really me, but incredibly proud that I was part of that.
I think that episode and that season is just a massive achievement. And as somebody who's presided over a ton of Doctor Who merchandise being produced, and it's mainly been my job over the last decade to sell that in America, I watched Doctor Who go from being a tiny cultural footnote in the US just to being the hottest thing at San Diego Comic-Con and New York Comic-Con, off the basis of the work that was done on that 9th Doctor series. You don't get any of that without that amazing season. No, what that achievement's just huge for Doctor Who to become, a kind of a popular TV show throughout the land in the USA from where it used to be when I was watching as a kid. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and all those years spent, I mean, in those what we think of as the what's the word? It was the wilderness years, isn't it?
Yeah,
sure. We just felt it was never going to come back.
Right, exactly.
And we were relying upon faded memories of why we loved it. And we go back and watch it again, but we began to, when I remember doing it with a certain sense of you know, instinctive mockery, because you didn't really want people to think that you took it that seriously. And the idea that when it came back, it would become something where people cared and loved it. I mean, that was the thing which I found most moving about it, really, was I remember when Dalek went out, and I had lots of friends over, people who'd worked on the show, and some of the other writers, and I didn't watch my episode because I was too nervous. But I stared out the window and just thought, you know, at the street outside my house, and thought, proportionally, because it's doing well, a lot of people that I've never met, just I can see, are now watching my episode. And that was, and the idea that they actually would care and the audience would build. I mean, to be part of Doctor Who again, where people genuinely loved it, when it wasn't a niche thing, was still feels like the sort of biggest rush, really.
Oh, I can believe it, because you guys brought Doctor Who into the mainstream. I mean, it is unthinkable watching Doctor Who in the way that I watched it at its peak for me. So watching Pertwee and Baker and Davison, perhaps, when it was essentially a very successful children's show, for it to become, which was basically back then even had extremely labyrinthine scripts and was quite difficult to follow, even if you're a science fiction fan and you're dedicated to it. So for it then to become the greatest cultural touchstone in the UK and a massive one in the US for a period of, say, 5 years, where it's the highest rated thing on Christmas Day, where it's got Morecambe and Wise ratings on Christmas Day. That is just unbelievable. I mean, it seems almost like an impossible chasm to bridge, you know what I mean?
I know. I was coasting for years on this sense of tremendous pride in it. It's like your favorite child, and just watching it do so well, even though I wasn't involved, just seeing it and just being always, you know, checking the ratings and watching every episode, of course, and always just thinking, this is incredible that we're doing this. I remember years before when BBC Three started and they began doing documentaries about, you know, sort of cutaway things from EastEnders. And I thought, wouldn't it be hilarious if anyone ever did that for Doctor? Then they did it. And I couldn't quite believe that actually there was there was a time when there were about 4 or 5 different Doctor Who things all at once. There was Confidential, and there was Torture, and Sarah Jane. And I just thought, this is, I mean, my inner 12-year-old, which of course is what I always approach Doctor Who with, just couldn't really understand. Like, it's like I'd slipped into a slightly different universe where I did actually I thought, am I dead? Am I actually dead? I mean, have I had some sort of massive heart attack? And this is sort of some sort of heaven, or maybe I'm actually in a coma. Anyway, on that cheerful note.
On that cheerful note, let's take you out of the coma and roll back a few steps. What was your first experience of Doctor Who?
I was very scared of it. I couldn't watch it in the 70s. I'm born in 1970s, so Tom Baker should have been my doctor. But I was too scared. If that theme music came on, and particularly that time tunnel, I used to leave the room. And I remember being utterly freaked by watching Rod Hull and Emu. They did a sketch about the deadly dustbins. And that frightened me so much that the idea was from my parents that I really shouldn't watch the thing that they were parodying. And it was only some years later, it was around the time of about 1980, and they'd replaced the theme music, and it was now Peter Howell, and it was a little bit safer for me. And a friend at school told me that Douglas Adams had written Doctor Who. And in the way he put it, it was my own childish, you know, idiocy. I thought that meant Douglas Adams had written all of Doctor Who. And I dared myself to go out and buy a Target novelization. I thought, because I love Hitchhiker, I ought to read his other work. And I looked through all the covers, and they looked terrifying. And I found one that I thought looked really, really not scary because it had such a terrible cover, which is, I've got it here, it's Image of the Pentacle.
Oh, fantastic.
This is the copy now, and it's got my original thing and my original home number. Doesn't work anymore, it's fine. And it's really scary. It's about people trying to kill death. And yet I was hooked, and I couldn't quite dare watch the programme until the 5 Faces of Doctor Who repeat season in 81. So I watched Davison as my doctor, really, and I was utterly obsessed by Doctor Who for about 4 or 5 years in that early 80s period.
And would you still say that Davison was your favourite Doctor?
He's certainly up there. I mean,
Yeah.
I get a tremendous feeling of nostalgic warmth with Davison. He's also a really brilliant actor.
He is.
And I think it's between him and Troughton. Patrick Troughton, I think, is another Doctor that whenever I watch Patrick Troughton, I'm always amazed, even with maybe not always very good scripts at times, just how hard he's working to be interesting. And I mean, Tom Baker does a very, very similar thing. You can always sense that Tom Baker is sometimes frustrated, but he's never not going to be the Doctor. I mean, that's what actually they all basically do that. But I think that I get my nostalgic kick from Davis mostly.
Oh yeah, I can see why. I think he's a fine actor. He's very good with emotion, Davison, I think. So you clearly were a fan, became a fan of the Target books.
Yeah.
Did you? I can see what your first one was because we just talked about it. Did you have any of the particular favourites, or have there ever been one that you wanted but you don't have?
I found the Terrance Dicks ones the easiest, but the ones I sort of began to really fall in love with were the Malcolm Hulke ones. So Cave Monsters was a massive influence, just because I love the fact that characters seem to be, you'd be given, they weren't called backstories because you didn't think of it in those terms, but the way in which he would just very, very subtly give so much depth to characters who would then be killed by a Silurian really affected me, actually, in the way that also that he had the bravery, I realised later on, to change the story to get a different emotional impact because it's now prose rather than television, was really impressive. But I actually do have them all. I mean, I'm going to be very snug about it.
Brilliant.
I know that some of them are now worth quite a bit of money, and I'm actually planning, that if I ever fall seriously ill, I can start selling off my copy of The Wheel in Space. But no, I do actually have a complete set, and that's, I mean, apart from the new ones, obviously, which I'll get on March the 11th. But that's the excitement, is I do have right over there in my office in transmission order complete series of the entire Target range.
That is very impressive and fantastic. And kind of you touched upon something which I wanted to ask you, which is what are the key differences between the script and your novelization?
What worried me about doing Dalek, I mean, looking back at the old four-parters that Terrance Dicks used to do, I mean, there's enough story in there, enough change of location that you feel it could be a novel. I think what I worried about with Dalek when I looked at it was that it's 45 minutes, it's quite fast-paced, it's very claustrophobic in terms of location, but also in terms of time. I mean, once it starts, it could be in real time, more or less. And that isn't very novelistic, that's like a short story. So I worried that the story is basically people just running up some stairs for 40 minutes. That's hard to pull off. So what I wanted to do was try to not sacrifice that, but also at the same time sort of have a conversation with the book about who these other characters were. And so you have the standard series of how many chapters it is, but then you have these, I call them interstitial chapters, where you suddenly just tell different stories, which may or may not seem directly relevant when you begin them, but then show an angle upon the way in which we should be understanding the Dalek or some of these characters who are quite minor, and we see actually what their real, history was, and also a certain irony. Usually the irony comes out of their deaths. So that, for example, the guy who's the torturer, whose skull gets crushed. I tell this enormous chapter story where as a child, he realizes the only way that he can stop his childhood headaches is by killing creatures. If he tortures a spider, his headache goes, and it grows into him becoming a school bully. If he's bullying a child, his headache stops. And of course, that's because I like the idea that at the moment of his death, the headache stops when his skull snaps, and it's having the fun of that. It's the idea of the soldier who, when the Dalek comes up the stairs, has a child that she's not seen in a year because of doing this job with Van Statten, and she always had to put him on the naughty step. And it's this idea that the Dalek is coming off the naughty step. And in a moment of her death, all she's really thinking about is the fact that she hasn't spoken to her child in a year. And it's that was the way in for me. It was trying to find a way of telling the story in a quite taut way, but then being able to do other chapters where I could have Van Statten meeting Donald Trump on a golf course. And so, I mean, lots of fun extra things, really, and also wanting to put sort of completely new twists upon the characters, so that one of them is an FBI agent trying to get Van Statten because of his taxes, which of course is not remotely in the TV episode, but now when you watch the TV episode back, you'll think, oh, there's another agenda going on, which we didn't realize. And that's kind of fun. I mean, that was what gave me the joy of writing it, actually. Sort of strange conversation I was having with my 15-year younger self, saying, I wonder if you could extend this and that. And it was about, I went back to all the early drafts, which were very, very different to what was broadcast. And they weren't actually very good. There's a good reason why Russell steered me into a more emotional direction. And I thought, well, let's continue what Russell was teaching me. I mean, let's actually make this as real, and let's actually really deepen and give much more emotional heft to what was going on, but we could only do so much in 44 minutes. So, I mean, I'm hoping it's kind of a fun read, which will be quite surprising.
Oh, Robert, I'm sure it will be. And I really appreciate your candor talking us through that. That's fascinating and has made me want to read the novel even more than I already did.
Oh,
I already really wanted to read it. So thank you very much for joining us at Forbidden Planet TV.
Not at all,
today.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Where Robert's been telling us all about the novelization that he has written of his classic Doctor Who episode, Dalek, which is being published by the Titans of Doctor Who Publishing, Target, and you can order from the links attached to this video. Thanks so much for being here today, mate. It's really lovely to meet you. Such a treat.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.